Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about aspects of Form 12. Form 12 is a form that either makes or breaks someone. I'm actually rather fond of this form. This is a form that I really just kind of enjoy doing just because, again, it's so weird. It's a really weird form. It's a paradigm shift of the ideas that you integrate into a fight. In some ways, it's more unique even than Shimsung, which is supposed to be like the culmination of, again, all of your hard work with your original, right? So back in the day, you had to do 1 through 13, 1 through Shimsung for black belt, but they changed it up. But allegedly, Shimsung was kind of like the culmination of all the ideas that you needed for, again, originally black belt, but now just Sangsu, right? So learning how to use a two-handed sword. So that's kind of saying something, right? So I really enjoy just the idea of Sangsu 12, although it is a winder, right? So it makes you quite winded as you go through it, again, full speed and full power. But just the ideas are just fun to play with. So let's have some fun with it. The first thing I want to talk about is just the idea behind this form. Again, what's going on? So this isn't quite new, but again, think about the terrain. The terrain here is allegedly, again, hallway. So again, we only work on the line, as people with small schools know. You have to do a lot of back shuffling. It's only linear, which is pretty rare for a form. It's only a linear form. I believe there's a couple others. I'm thinking about like Yeto 2, for example, is also entirely linear. Again, it's kind of that exception, right? It's even broken down to 4 major parts, right? But what I really like about it is not necessarily the terrain, which in itself is kind of interesting, right? It's just the idea of how you're fighting, right? So let me explain that a little bit more. So whenever you're advancing, right? So if you, dear listener, are my opponent, the idea of this, again, this is my own interpretation as opposed to necessarily that was taught to me. The idea is I am just hacking, whacking, cutting as much as I can going forward. But then when I'm going back, so again, if you've seen this before, it's the cross cut, again, jumping over something. You're finishing off people that you cut, which is really kind of interesting, right? So the idea of this form is, again, I'm cutting, getting out of the way, making sure I'm just like harming as much as I can going forward, and then I'm kind of like finishing the job on my way back, and then I keep going forward, go back a little bit, keep going forward, etc., etc. So just the idea of that's very different from all the other forms that we've had. So first of all, like you're much more aware of just the body count, if you want to think of it that way. So metaphorical body count, dear FBI agent who might be watching. The idea is like, all right, so I, again, cut, and notice the way that we move is very much just keeping really tight quarters with, again, the people that you're cutting, kind of moving around them, kind of like navigating, getting underneath, right? So you're really close, and then you're finishing, right? So these big winding crosscuts as you jump over again. So first of all, why are you jumping? Bodies, right? So that they're the fallen, right? They have a little more of a PC idea. Yeah, the folk, they're on the floor, right? You need to, again, so finish, get over the bodies. So using them now as a barrier for you to kind of, not quite retreat, but then for you to be able to again move forward again. Use that, again, as like your safety net, again, if they are coming back at you, and then you keep just trudging through. So this is a very like 300 idea, right? So the Spartans versus Persians, like we're just like bull rushing, retreating, bull rushing, retreating, which is a really interesting idea, which is why I like Form 12 as much as I do, is it's just new. It's a new way to, again, perceive a battlefield. On top of that new concept are 2 new-ish moves, right? So the very last move is very, very clearly very, very unique, right? But I call it the umbrella block just because that's how I learned it from Taekwondo, for example. But this guy, right? So technically it should be here, right? But I'm just going to do this for the sake of I guess, a little more clarity, right? Also for super clarity, right? So think about Form 12. So allegedly, right, so again, this is not canonical. In fact, if you mention this to a Federation master, they tend to either secretly agree with you, but don't say in public, or they just outright say no. You're allegedly using a Sangsu gum. Now, I mentioned that's probably true for all of these, but especially for 12. So even people who don't jump on the Sangsu gum bandwagon. So what I mean by that is, again, the sword that's super long, right? So it's like that big, right? But the idea is, like, if you take a look at for example, some texts that talk about, again, the use of a Sangsu gum, a lot of these techniques are very similar to what we see in those books. Like this one, for example. If Sang H. Kim is out there and he wants to sponsor this video, I'd be more than happy to receive it. I'm not above that. But that's the idea, right? So, so there are ideas that were associated with, again, ancient, it's kind of like how it's kind of referred to, but like, again, ancient Sangsu gum usage, and specifically this form. Most specifically the last aspect we're talking about, which is like one of the last moves of the form. But the use of a block like this, right? So now we usually don't use this as an actual block, right? So we're not trying to necessarily stop a motion. Now, even if we did, if we have a Sangsu gum and a really long sword, and again, I can maybe use more of my hand, that makes more sense, right? So if you have a really long sword and you're in short range, you do want to do what we call half swording, which is a lot more specific and it's a lot more true for Yedo 9, so I'm probably going to talk about half sorting then. Actually, no. It's actually in Shimsung, right? When you start doing this fun stuff, right? So when you have a really long sword, you sometimes do want to use, again, what we call half sorting. Again, a term I'm stealing from HEMA, so all my friends from LART. But yeah, so the idea is you're using, again, your hand to help manipulate, be able to move a longer, heavier weapon. So when we do this block, right, again, it's not necessarily blocking anything. It could also just be, again, cover, again, and then you start moving in to the rest of the form. So that is, again, fairly new. It's a fairly new technique, but not nearly as new as the one we're going to be talking about next. This guy, right? So just everything about it is very unique and a little bit strange, right? So you might be thinking like, all right, so why? So I'm like, my sword is like in the worst possible position for me to use it in such a way that I don't die, right? So for example, if someone's trying to center cut me, I'm not gonna be like, meh, right? I'd be using the hand instead. Now this makes a little bit more sense, and only a little bit more sense when you consider again that this would be a long sword and might be touching this hand. But even then, right? So again, this is a very strange guard. Also, my hand's getting tired. It's also like usually in Bomse, right? So why? So why does this exist in the first place, right? Now, when I did ask a higher up, the main idea was I could use this as a clear cut, as in like clearing back this way and going back into it, right? Which might make sense. Right? It also might make sense, especially if you are working alongside peers, because it's sort of hard to use a very long sword without hitting your peers. So this kind of keeps it all in a very tight area, as opposed to, again, a lot of the kenjuks, right? We actually don't hold for that long in this form, right? Which again, usually when we're kind of pausing, it's usually more, again, in something like this, or again, something similar to that, or you're busy stabbing someone, which is a stab that we've seen in Form 8. But yeah, so this might be a simple way to just kind of keep, a bunch of Sangsugum wielding people kind of together without, again, murdering each other. If you really need to, you could, again, engage a nice reverse grip crosscut as a clear, but that's more up to you. So if you can think of more interesting uses of this particular guard, by all means, again, let me know. Leave a comment. Give me an idea of what you're thinking. So as usual, can we retcon, right? Now, obviously we can't retcon this guard, right? But the others, right, so again, the main idea behind it, right, so the main idea behind Form 12 is, again, do as much damage as you can, kind of clean up the mess on your way back. We do something like that kind of similarly in Form 8, right? So the idea is we just did our ba-ba-ba-ba-ban, right? And we do our nice reverse grip cut, and we're back in a good defense, and then we do that downward thrust. So we do that downward thrust allegedly to finish off someone that we've, felled before. Okay, right? So again, so we're finishing someone off. So in a certain degree, we do in fact do what we're talking about in Form 12, right? Now maybe not on a mass scale like Form 12 is. We're just like reaping with a giant crosscut and jumping over the bodies. But again, it's the same idea. So you're finishing off again, people that you wounded in the past. So can we retcon? At least to Form 8. There might be earlier examples of it. But yeah, so at least to a certain degree, we absolutely can. Now, with regard to, again, this block, you may have seen an earlier version of Gumdo. So actually the very combination I just did, right, so that downward thrust. So the way I learned it was actually here, and you're either stabbing. I've also seen kind of like stabbing down this way. So in the past, we have used this hand kind of like as a guiding motion for me to kind of like stab, right? So that might, again, will make more sense if you have a longer blade they have to contend with, right? So if I'm trying to stab someone, I'm just kind of like trying to surgically try to stab you with this one, a little bit harder, versus I'm kind of like using this almost like a pool table, right? Here, kind of like aiming a little bit more easily because I have something to rest it on, as opposed to, again, everything being past a fulcrum, which is going to be a lot more difficult. So yeah, so in the past we have done something like this. You can also eventually augment this kind of block. So for example, something similar in Yeta 1, for example, but we can also interpret that a little bit differently as well. So yes, this particular one, usually in the Sotose, is pretty unique to Form 12. But again, the ideas behind it, again, using a guard as kind of like the lookout point, using, again, what would be a block as your defense, happens, right? So again, so take these ideas, see if you can retcon them even earlier, right? See if it works, again, for you when you go through Form 12, as well as do these ideas work with your current forms that you're working on. Not even just forms, if anything you're working on, right? So if you're working on, again, the kyukums, the focuses, anything like that, see if it also works for you there. So with that, so keep training, stay safe, and stay humble. Haidong!